from the head of the hospital. His name is Dr. Oz. And Dr. Oz shared with us his experience. Just as every one of you in Turkey, he also had a story to share. And that story was about the very first minutes of how this earthquake response started. Dr. Oz told us that, literally, he had to get out of the rubble and continue going on. During those first hours, they had to keep moving. And why is that so important? Why is that important in the sense when we are talking about strategy? Because as I mentioned, when we talk about strategy, we need to know where we are going. What do we need to do? Dr. Oz knew perfectly what he needed to do. And they were continuing every single hour for the next weeks and months, responding to the earthquake. They knew what to do. You can have very, very robust and well-thought and researched strategies, but if the people that implement them don't understand them, you get nowhere. That's why it's so important that people understand every single task that they are supposed to do. Dr. Oz knew that he needed to go to the hospital, and then he needed to meet with his colleagues, and that's how they can actually start to save lives. Now, how can we reflect that and bring it back to communications? When we are talking about strategic communications, everybody needs to know what is their role. Everybody needs to know how to do what they are supposed to do and which resources they have at hand. When we talk about international disaster response or disaster communications, everything is about context. I've had the honor to be part of different responses at different levels, from the headquarters in Geneva or the national coordination centers or at the regional level. Every single one is different. And the context matters a lot. For example, Caleb mentioned the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014. That was my first experience working on a global organization. I was part of the WHO social media team. We were monitoring, tracking what people were saying. Strategic communications was about understanding what do we want it to do. The strategy for WHO social media back then could be summarized in 2 words: shareability for health. Why is that? We wanted to make information shareable, understandable, to have impact ultimately in people's health. That was the idea, and everybody knew what was the objective. That means people that take photos, they knew what they were doing. Epidemiologists that help us understand the situational reports, the SITREPs, they knew what they were doing. It's important that every single one of the team members understand what is their role so you can actually have that impact. In other responses, you can also get to see the limits of that. When I was working for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, one of the biggest disasters that hit Mozambique in its history was Cyclone Idai. You may remember it. The images were devastating. It was quite a powerful and it really put the people of Mozambique facing a terrible disaster. And how do people actually get to know about that disaster? Because my colleagues that were sent to support as an international support team, they knew what to do. Forecast weather. You know that a cyclone will hit in this specific area. Your search and your response colleagues go get deployed, get their moves on the ground. So what do? They literally had to jump into a helicopter to make an assessment. What is the assessment of the damages that is happening here in Mozambique? Nobody else is doing this. We are the very first ones to do it. They record a shaky video with their mobile phones. So what? It's the first time that you get to tell the story of a cyclone in Mozambique to the whole world. And how did that little video that was tweeted literally in the air from a helicopter had some impact? Because we knew what to do. Because as soon as my colleague tweeted that video, we were able to amplify it and bring that local action to global impact. We were able to share it with the people that had a massive amplifier, a microphone that could do it. BBC was embedding it, and all the other major players that were looking forward to see what was going on in that specific disaster area immediately came and say, we're showing this to the world. And that's the power of strategic communications, that you actually have the opportunity to tell the story in the middle of a disaster area to the rest of the world. Why is that important? Because you can actually mobilize resources, you can mobilize teams, you need solidarity, you need a response to continue going, not only during the first 48 hours, 3 weeks, 3 months, but long term. That's the biggest challenge that we are facing. That's why strategic communications become even more important as we continue in the different stages of the response. Now, in my experience, there's also a lot of work to be done when it comes to SOPs. Do you know what are SOPs? That's what I thought. Nobody knows that. Acronyms are really bad for effective communication. SOPs should always be unpacked. That means the standard operation procedures. What do we mean by that? Helping people to understand what do we need to do. It means that in some context, it can take the form of a checklist. Who are great at this? For example, the German Red Cross. They have a great checklist, and you can take a look step by step what needs to happen at this specific level on these specific activations. That's really important. What other SOPs can be there? What other standard operation procedures? They are critically important because they help responders not to forget key elements when they are responding in a very crisis, in a very stressful situation. The challenge is when those standard operation procedures, when that roadmap hits a severe block, or when that roadmap actually faces the challenge of a lifetime. When you face the biggest disaster in a century, when you face the biggest tsunami, the biggest earthquake, the biggest cyclone, depending on where you are. Another critically important aspect is, again, balancing those means that you have. If you're in an international organization, if you're in a government, if you're in a big NGO, you can have access to discussions with platforms and partners to help you amplify your work, to help you showcase what you do. That's not the case for everybody. Also, you should never over-rely on partners. Take a look at what's going on right now on Twitter. A lot of the disaster response emergency communications SOPs are based on Twitter first, because they understand that some of those key strategic audiences are there. Journalists, governments, embassies, ministries, international responders, they are there. So do you go there, right? Like the National Weather Service in the US, just a couple of weeks ago, they couldn't use their tweeting SOP because Mr. Musk is now changing the rules of how it goes. Or take a look at what happened to NGOs in Australia. When Facebook made the changes that suddenly you could not use your Facebook page anymore. What happened to those SOPs? That's why it's so important to go back to resilience. We need to be resilient. What does it mean to be resilient? Many of you are working on this area. For you, the word tells you a lot, from your experience, from your context. I see resilience as being adaptive, as being able to get back, to be creative, to be imaginative, to be able to change course if needed. When it comes to all of these stories that I'm sharing with you today,